welcome to the ID Talk podcast. I'm Alex Perala. I'm here with my colleague Tony Bitsionis. Hello, Tony.
Hello.
And today we've got a conversation with Jay Meier from FaceTec. Jay is a regular guest on this show. He is the SVP of North American Operations for FaceTec. He's also an influential figure through the Kantara Initiative. He's on their deepfake IDV working group, and he's chair at the Identity Theft Resource Center Biometrics Working Group. So influential guy in the biz. Always interesting to talk to. This conversation we have for you today really focuses on this idea Jay has about binding biometrics to an identity. It's kind of a conceptual framework, I guess, that's pretty closely related to the PKI fallacy, which he has talked about on this show before. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go back, I don't know, a couple months ago, Jay was on and went into detail about the PKI fallacy there. But you'll hear it all explained pretty clearly through this discussion, which, as always, was really interesting. He's thought really hard about this stuff and always brings some interesting points to bear on important issues in identity verification and authentication. So before we get to that, though, as usual, I just want to check if there's any big news, Tony, that we need to alert our listeners to.
There's always big news, and this is just going to be the now weekly update or reminder, I should say, that Identity Week America is just a few weeks away, September 11th and 12th, and we will be in Washington, I should say, and we will be there, and we'll be in booth 608 at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. So make sure you visit identityweek.net, get your passes if you haven't, get registered, and we look forward to seeing a lot of people there, and just generally really looking forward to being there.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And again, like we keep talking to people who are getting ready, and it just seems like there's a lot of excitement for this event. I know one person we were talking to was saying that it was like after the pandemic years when everything was online, it feels like there's just like so much pent up, I don't know, excitement to actually see people in person again. So yeah, hopefully that'll come through when we're there. Hopefully we won't ruin it.
We might.
But yeah, swing by booth 608.
608. Yep. What about you? Anything you want to pinpoint?
Just a couple little things. Right after we talked to Jay, FaceTec had some news that caught my attention. They announced that Owen McShane is their new VP of Government Relations, and he is the former Deputy Commissioner of New York's DMV. So it's not like that title makes it sound like he was like sitting behind a desk and like a bit of a suit, but he's got like a 30-year career in the DMV where he was investigating fraud. He started as a fraud investigator and was looking into auto theft and fraudulent claims and stuff like that. So he's seen some stuff. And yeah, it's interesting. He'll bring some interesting perspective to their I guess mobile ID team for sure, and anti-fraud. So notable news. And I also wanted to mention, this is not related at all, but I have my AI update that I do every week. And the last one that I wrote, there's just this little item that I found fascinating that SAG-AFTRA, the union for Hollywood actors, had come to an agreement with this online talent marketplace platform called Narrative that basically like it set up a framework for actors to license their voice biometrics for use in ads. So like Reese Witherspoon can just make an agreement that her exact voice can be used in a car ad or something, and she doesn't have to actually read any lines, and she gets some money for it. So Yeah, it's just kind of
How
wild.
do I get in on that?
You have to be an actor. You have to be in SAG-AFTRA. So
No, can't act.
yeah,
Can't
yeah.
act.
I've seen your attempt at a poker face,
Mm,
and
I'm no good.
I don't know if that's in the cards for you. But
Good one.
anyway, I just thought that was cool, especially after Scarlett Johansson got so mad at OpenAI for using her voice, allegedly without her permission, for their chatbot thing that they
Mm.
then walked back. It's kind of a surprising development, or maybe not. Maybe that's just like, yeah, of course they made a deal to address that exact issue. So
Yeah.
anyway, you can find all this news on findbiometrics.com. And without further ado, let's get to the talk with Jay. All right, we're very happy to once again welcome Jay Meier to the show. Listeners will be familiar with this guy at this point. He is the SVP of North American Operations for FaceTec. Jay is also Vice Chair at Kantara's Deepfake IDV Working Group, and he's a chair at the Identity Theft Resource Center Biometrics Working Group. So an influential figure in the industry, and definitely somebody worth listening to. So Jay, welcome back.
Thanks. Influential, if not controversial. That's the tightrope I like to walk.
Yep.
But thank you very much. As always, it's a privilege to be here, and I'm grateful for that opportunity.
We always love talking with you. And we do have a lot to follow up from the last time you were with us, which was a couple months ago, but that was a pretty wide-ranging conversation, and listeners who haven't heard it should go back and listen, maybe even before listening to this one, because Jay really clarified his thinking around a lot of topics that I think are going to come up today. But one thing that we kind of started talking about in your previous appearance, but I think there's a lot more to flesh out, is the idea of there's like a tension in binding identities to credentials and biometrics. And maybe we can start there and just explain, like, if we're trying to figure out identity verification, is it like, what's the right framework? What do we attach credentials to? Do we
Sure.
attach them simply to biometrics, to a device,
Sure.
to what?
Okay. Well, I understand the question, and that question is kind of at the heart of much of the problems that we see out there in the field today, right? All the frauds and cybersecurity issues and hacks, and binding is a critical function of any identity management system. And so, what are we talking about binding? It's kind of a term that is loosely defined out there, but it basically means, how do we connect pieces that are not necessarily physically connected? Okay. So if you think about a typical credential, like a driver's license, okay, what does the driver's license actually do, right? It's a piece of plastic with a number on it. That piece of plastic has personal identity information about a particular person, right? So it creates uniqueness inside of the population, right? It also includes references or links to privileges that that person is entitled to enjoy, right? So in a driver's license, the privilege is driving a car on a public road, right? So the credential now has bound an identity to a privilege, right? And that, it seems pretty straightforward. Okay. And it can be recorded in the database somewhere. It's listed on the physical credential itself, et cetera, right? So there's this connection. And the problem is, as many of us know, when a lot of youngsters try to get their older siblings' ID, or they buy a fake ID somewhere, why? So they can use that credential that represents some age minimum, so that they can enjoy the privilege of buying liquor illegally, right? So they're using that credential to buy liquor. Okay, the birth date on the driver's license is something that automatically means that person's allowed to enjoy the privilege of buying alcohol, right? And so what's the problem with that situation? The problem with that is that there's nothing that is strongly binding the identity and the privilege to an actual physical human being. Okay. That's why the identity and the privilege can be transferred to somebody else just by buying one or stealing your brother's ID or whatever it is. And if you think about it, that vector right there is the super majority of cybersecurity breaches, hacks, identity frauds, identity crimes. Okay, transferring a valid credential that binds an identity to a privilege to somebody that's not authorized to use it. That's just it. I mean, that's like 85% of the fraud out there today, right? So in the driver's license example, the way we historically have bound the credential to an actual physical human being is by putting a picture in there. So when you enroll in the system at the DMV or whoever to get your driver's license, you pass the test, right? You earn the privilege, you enroll in the system. They have an idea, strong idea of the identity. They know what privileges this identity is entitled to. You are standing there and they take a picture, and that is bound to the identity in their database, right? So it's the picture that binds the physical human being to the credential and the identity and the privileges associated with it. Okay. The same concept applies online as is in the physical world, right? We have these credentials that typically are issued by somebody. Let's say it's a mobile driver's license, okay? Or it could be a verifiable credential. It could be a self-sovereign credential. It could be a FIDO credential, right? They are on record somewhere bound to an identity, okay? But there's nothing really that typically that strongly binds that digital credential to an actual physical human being. And so the same kind of transference happens online, right? Again, that's the super majority of the frauds out there, is somebody basically using someone else's credential to access privileges they're not entitled to. Okay. So what's lacking in the environment is a sufficiently strong binding between the actual physical human, the carbon-based life form, and the identity, and by default, by extension, the credentials that are bound to that identity, right? We don't make it hard enough to allow people to pass that credential somewhere else. It's not hard enough to use a credential that you're not authorized to use. Does that make sense, right? It's too easy. The lack of binding makes it too easy for someone else to use the credential and the privileges that they are not authorized to use.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we raise the strength of the binding?
Historically, and the PKI fallacy says that we have all these credentials online that are super strong, right? Cryptography is wonderful technology. That's what it does, is it guarantees the integrity of the relationship between a device and a data object like a digital credential of some type, right? It also guarantees the integrity of the data object itself. That's what cryptography does. And it binds the digital credential to a device, right? And that device could be a chip that's embedded in a passport, or it could be a chip that's embedded in a physical access, ID card, like the old HID prox cards, or some other type of credential. A credit card has a chip in it, right? That is a device. it actually performs functions. It doesn't just store things, it performs some functions. And that chip binds the privilege to an identity, right? But it doesn't go far enough to bind those things to an actual physical human being. So we need to raise the strength of the binding so that the credentials and privileges can't be passed to someone else. Okay, we've got a million different ways that we've tried to do that. Well, let me just back up for a second. If you look at, if you read anything about digital identity these days, you're going to hear about mobile driver's licenses. You're going to hear about verifiable credentials. You're going to hear about self-sovereign identity schemes. You're going to hear about FIDO, and maybe there's others. Okay, those are cryptographically secure identity systems. The security is in the strength of the binding between the digital object, the certificate or the token or whatever it was, and the privilege, and that relationship to a device. Okay, so, and that's where it ends. We presume that we know who's in control of that device by using a myriad of different authenticators. The problem is that all of those authenticators suck, right? Every day we hear about an authenticator that was compromised, right? Passwords are an example. Mm-hmm. Passwords were originally designed to bind a human being to a cryptographic certificate, right? Mm-hmm. So you used a password to get access to the privileges that were represented by the cryptographic certificate, which is bound to your computer. Okay, and that might give you access to a domain or some service, whatever it is. You can get into something. Mm-hmm. So we know that the privilege is bound to the device very, very strongly, and we know that the devices are connected through securely through PKI, right? But the password is weak; could be passed to someone else, and we've been hearing about that forever. You got other types of authenticators, and we've invented new ones every single day, like using the device accelerometer in your phone to try and understand where, if that person is alive, right? Are they shaking the phone when they're using it? The geolocation functions in a device. Well, if that phone says that it's in China and we know Jay's supposed to be in Wisconsin, USA, and things start happening with that phone in China, we know it might mean that it's not Jay, right? So there's a probability that it's not Jay using the phone, right? The phone didn't shake correctly. The phone was in the wrong geolocation, whatever else, okay? There are biometrics embedded in the phones. We've talked about anonymous biometrics 1,000 times, right? Those anonymous biometrics that are embedded in the phone are very secure. They're secured through cryptography, super secure, right? The data is bound to the device in a very, very, very secure way. Okay. The problem is the biometric data is not bound to an identity profile anywhere. So we don't know whose biometric data it is. And it can be swapped out with the use of a PIN, right? Again, a PIN can be transferred to someone else, right? So the biometric data can be swapped out. So all the privileges that are associated with the credentials that are bound to that phone can be used by whoever is in control of the phone, right? That's where we are today. And all of those identity managements, those identity schemes, those cryptographic schemes, in and of themselves, the functions that they provide in their little bubble is great, very strong, right? But none of them outline any type of way. They don't specify at all, even try to specify how you bind the digital credential and those associated privileges with a physical human being.
So doesn't MFA address this issue, or like to some extent?
So there's this MFA thing, multi-factor authentication. And if you listen to, the White House and other people and other organizations, there's now new mandates that everybody has to use multi-factor authentication. Well, I got news for you, Mr. President. Multi-factor authentication has been around for 20 years, okay? The reason multi-factor authentication exists is because of the inherent weakness of our current form factors of authenticators that presume to bind a human being to those credentials, right? And since we can't count on any single one of them to truly, offer a very high level of confidence that we know who's in control of the device, we raise the statistical likelihood that we know who's in control by adding additional factors. Okay, so the statistical likelihood of all of the factors in some multi-factor authentication combination, the statistical likelihood of all of them being wrong is very low compared to the statistical likelihood of just one of them, right?
Okay.
So that's where MFA comes from. But the problem is that we stupidly don't stop there. Okay, the factors that people use in MFA frequently are flawed. They're almost worthless. Okay, we already talked about anonymous biometrics. They say multi-factor authentication, you got anonymous biometrics. That's a pretty crappy factor. Okay, the fact that the device has a cryptographic token associated with it sounds like it's really good. It's another factor, right? But since we don't know who's in control of the device, that factor is also garbage, right? One-time passwords, phishing attacks, all of those authenticators can be passed to someone else, right? So we haven't sufficiently raised the probability of knowing who's in control of the device that the credentials are bound to, and by extension, the privileges that are associated with those credentials. Okay, this is where biometrics comes in, but not just biometrics. Some biometrics and biometrics that are designed in a certain architecture. Okay, the biometric that's on the phone. You go talk to identity verification vendors and you ask them if they use biometrics. They're like, "Oh yeah, we use it. We use what's on the phone." Well, we already know what's wrong with the phone, with the biometrics that are on the phone. So that's like a wrong answer. Okay. Oh yeah, we have multi-factor authentication. The right architecture means that we have been able to move the biometric information in virtual real time to verified identity data somewhere, and then we bind the biometric data to that verified identity data, right?
Yeah.
So if we know to a virtual guarantee, nothing's ever guaranteed in human authentication. It's always a probability estimate, right? But if I was standing in front of you and I was collecting your fingerprints or your face biometric data to bind to the account profile as you're opening a bank, right? We have a pretty strong indication that that biometric came from you, the same guy that's represented by the account profile, right? So we have a high degree of confidence that that biometric represents Alex and the same guy that opened the account at the bank. Okay. From that point forward, you want to use that biometric to make sure this guy trying to get into the account at the bank is the same guy whose biometrics are bound to the account profile, right? This is how biometrics are used, and conceptually anyway, to bind a physical human being to a credential and the privileges associated with it.
So, all that having been said, Jay, isn't mobile ID that uses biometrics still an improvement over using like physical ID cards?
So, mobile driver's licenses have a picture in them, just like a regular driver, a physical driver's license, but it's very difficult to use that to confirm that the person holding the device is the same person using that's represented by the mobile driver's license. In fact, the fact that it's a picture kind of implies that it's a flash pass. If you're walking into a bar, okay, and you want to get in the bar and you have to be 21 or 20 or whatever age it is, wherever the hell you are, the the bouncer says, I need to see your ID. So what do? You flash him you show him your mobile driver's license. And he says, oh yeah, well, I guess that's a valid driver's license because I heard about it on the news. And that's your picture, presumably, right? The guy standing there, he's been drinking for 6 hours while he's been on the job. He's looked at 1,000 people coming and going. He's interested in the girl standing in the back, and he's going to give you about 30 seconds at the door before he gives you the boot. He might give it 5 seconds to look at the picture in the mobile driver's license and compare it to your face as you're standing there, right? That's a flash pass. That doesn't work. It's weak. People are really bad at comparing faces. The key is NIST, for example. We talked about NIST. One of the great things that NIST did was a bunch of research comparing how well computer biometric systems match biometrics when compared to how well people do it. And it turns out that computer biometric systems are way better at matching biometrics than people are, right? Yet our credentialing systems still utilize what is effectively the flash pass.
Just to boil down what you're saying, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So if we imagine like I'm a cop and I'm checking some guy's license, and maybe I have some sort of app that scans his face and then verifies that it matches the license. Like that seems really strong, but I think what you're saying is all that does is confirm that the guy's face matches the face on the license, which doesn't tell you anything about his identity.
No,
right?
it's not quite right. Okay. If you have the credential, the physical driver's license or the digital driver's license, okay, and you have some piece of software, an app or whatever it is, and you take a picture of your face, and then it automatically, through the computerized system, compares the new face data of the person standing there to the data that's represented in the mobile driver's license or whatever, right? That is substantially better than what's already in the phones. But the problem is that app, is controlled and run by the main processor in the phone, okay? That processor is basically available to almost any rogue software that wants to take control of it, okay? That's scare tactic number one, right? The second problem is that the biometric systems that are in an app that are not relying on the device native biometrics like Touch ID or something, right? Those systems typically are extremely poor.
Jake, could you just talk a little bit about some of the potential issues associated with relying on device biometrics?
Sure. We call them device native biometrics. Okay. And what we mean by that is the biometric capabilities that are built into the devices by the device manufacturers. So Apple has Face ID and Touch ID, right? One is a face matching system, one is a fingerprint matching system, and other vendors have their own iterations of these. By and large, the biggest problem with device native biometrics is that they are what I call anonymous biometrics. Okay. I don't care. Let's just accuracy rates aside for a second. The biometric data that is collected by that sensor, whether it's the camera or the fingerprint sensor, the biometric data is stored in a cryptographic module, and they each have their name for it, the secure enclave or whatever. It's a piece of silicon that stores data, right? Very, very, very securely. So the biometric data is stored very securely, but there's nothing about that biometric data that indicates where it came from or who it came from. That biometric data is not bound to verified identity data anywhere. It's not bound to anything but the phone. In other words, it's anonymous. There's no name associated with it at all. And so when you enroll on the phone or when you change your biometric data around, it just takes new biometric data and replaces the old biometric data without knowing who submitted the biometric data, right? So that biometric data can be changed using the PIN for the phone, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the biometric data isn't really even the primary security feature of the phone. The PIN is, and we know how bad PIN and passwords are, right?
Right.
So if I was able to get a hold of your phone and had your PIN, I could replace your biometric data with mine in the secure enclave. And from that point on, the phone would effectively tell relying parties, the bank app or whatever, that I am you. The
Right.
relying party has no way to know that the biometric has been swapped out. Okay.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're using biometrics in device native systems doesn't mean you know who's in control of the device. And by extension, it means you can't know who is in control of the credentials and the privileges associated with that device.
Yeah.
Understand?
Yeah.
Further to
Yeah.
that point, I think because we covered the Face ID so much when it was coming out, and I remember there was so much press about how effective it is, how sophisticated the technology was, and yet there was always like a kind of disclaimer from Apple that the PIN is actually your key like authentication mechanism. That's the main one. And it was always so strange to me. Yeah.
Well, the Face ID is a very powerful system, mechanically. It captures a lot of data, right? It's three-dimensional data. We're big advocates of 3D, but it's proprietary, right? It requires proprietary hardware to be embedded in the phone. It's got an infrared projector and a sensor device that specifically reads the data from the infrared beams that are projected on your face. And while it creates a lot of data and may be highly accurate and may have some liveness systems associated with it, it still is anonymous biometrics, right? And so it's cool, but you might even argue for a minute that if you have to buy an iPhone, a top tier iPhone, in order to have access to that kind of anonymous, sophisticated but anonymous biometrics, it may actually be economically biased, right?
Mhm.
People that don't have a lot of money don't go out and buy $1,200 iPhones. And so they don't have access to even that level of biometric scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's funny that you should mention that because I'm remembering that a few years ago I bought my mother a smartphone, and she's in her 70s. She's Greek, barely speaks English, but we bought
Is
her
it the
a
one
phone.
with the huge buttons on it?
Yeah, we know that's what she wanted, but we bought her. I went to like a small electronic shop around here, and I just bought her like a fairly inexpensive old Motorola touchscreen smartphone. It's like $150. So it wasn't super dirt cheap, but it wasn't a great phone. And my sisters and I were setting it up for her, and I decided it did have fingerprint security, so I decided to set that up, but she wasn't putting her finger on the screen properly. You got to like rotate it and move the position a couple times. And so I was like, oh man, this piece of junk doesn't work. Let me try it with my fingerprint. And it worked. And then she was like, I'm never going to do fingerprint. And we're like, you know what? She doesn't really need it. So I disabled that. And then I got to get her a new phone because it was years ago. But recently I was going through her settings because she was having issues. And I found the fingerprint setting in the menu, and it still remembered my fingerprint from 3 or 4 years ago because I didn't delete the profile. So
that's
I don't
exactly
know
the
if,
point.
I don't know if like
some of these sensors, some of these systems allow for, now Face ID only allows for one biometric template in the secure enclave, right? That's a security feature, right? Because you can't have more than one face potentially controlling the device. But many of these fingerprint sensors, including Touch ID, I believe, allow for as many as 5 different fingers to be enrolled in the system. But again, they don't require any binding to an identity, so they don't know whose fingers they are. And that means they don't know if the fingers came from different people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, who are you really in communication with electronically? Who's really accessing the bank account? We don't know. And that is a big, big problem. There's, like the European, I think it's the European Banking Association or something like that. I can't remember the name of the association. They actually banned the use of device native biometrics specifically for their authentication purposes, their standard for authentication, specifically because of the anonymity of the biometric data and the fact that it can be swapped out.
Okay, we are out of time for today, but that was really interesting, Jay. So let's pick this up again soon, because I think we have a lot more questions to unpack what you've been talking about today. So thanks, as always, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jay.
Well, I hope my rambling was coherent and people get something out of it. I love talking about this stuff, and I love talking about this stuff with you guys. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, we love listening to you, so don't apologize.
Thanks, Jay.
All right. Well, have a good one. Later.